All right, so everyone, I have a beautiful friend here with me. Her name is Fadela Hilali. She's an executive coach, a leadership consultant, and she's an author of a book on emotional eating. Sister, do you want to name your book? Stuff.
Thank you. My book is called Stuff,
Stuff.
How to Feel So Good About Yourself. You won't have room for cake. I mean, you can have your cake, of course, but it's optional, only if you want to.
You have no room for cake or cakes. S.
Yeah, exactly. But it is not the boss of you. It's by design.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm so happy to have you here. So, by the way,
I'm
happy
so happy to be
birthday.
here.
My
Thank
absolute
you.
honor to have you to shine light in Authenticity Project, whatever episode this is. I didn't count, but one thing I would love to really like dive in with you and explore with you today is about, yes, self-empowerment for women, because you are the expert in this arena. You're in the executive coaching. I'm sure you've been working with a lot of women professionally. There are also entrepreneurs who are very
That's
successful,
right.
busy, but
Yeah.
there's a common ground that I feel like we as entrepreneurs, we share so dearly, is that overwhelming big emotions within us,
Yeah.
no matter what, even though we could seem like, oh, we're confident and we seem like, okay, we're doing our
Yeah.
ish,
Yeah.
but inside it's like there's that overwhelming sense of, what if I lose control? Do you know?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know
So,
exactly what you mean. And I think spoiler alert, it's something that never goes away. We just get really better at tolerating it and cohabiting with it, right? And it's one of the things that I say all the time is that two things can be true, right? You can be this strong, powerful woman, very ambitious. You can be driven. You can be everything you want, like all of those strength attributes that we seem to think of, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, but even like in an executive career, right? Which comes with, rising to the different levels of an organization.
yeah.
And I think that one of the biggest myths out there is that you have to completely suffocate that softer part of you if you want to survive. And first, if you want to survive and thrive eventually, it's just like they cannot coexist. And that's one of the biggest myths. And that's one of the things that I constantly unpack. And, you were talking about expert. I mean, I'm an expert on myself because I feel like I've reinvented myself so many times, or perhaps it's not even reinventing, it's just like shedding layers and seeing what's underneath. And that's what prompted this curiosity in this field. Is just like, is it just me? Like, am I the only one who does this? And it turns out not at all.
No, we're doing the
It's not
onion
just me.
peeling. Doing the onion peeling dance together. So,
Yeah.
how about this? I just feel, this inkling that I would love to invite you to share more of your personal journey, because you
Yeah.
wrote the book Stuff, right? And then there's a lot
Yeah.
to do with emotional eating, and then that's
That's right.
our physical body, yes, but it has a lot to do with our healing inside and out.
Yeah.
So really would love to have you to just kind of like, share with us, in certain points in your life, what are those points that kind of light up like, oh my gosh, because of this turning point, it actually turned me into, the next version of who I am.
Yeah.
Well, authenticity, because this is authenticity project. We're always exploring,
Absolutely.
shedding
Yeah.
skins,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Where
And
that
I mean, I'll keep it short. I'll keep it short, obviously, and just give you some highlights. But what's really interesting is that in my younger years, I was so clear on who I was and what I wanted. And it sounded a little bit overwhelming to people who were my age and even grown ups around me. It was just like, wow, okay, that's a bit much, right? But it was very unapologetic. It was very clear in my head. But obviously, as you grow up and you start the teenage years and then you become a young adult, a young woman, then you start to contrast, calibrate based on what you think is expected and what you think is acceptable.
yeah.
And that's where I feel like I got completely lost. So the thing that was a constant for me is this drive to succeed, but to succeed in what that was completely based on what I thought was expected of me. And obviously, it didn't matter how well I did, whether it's academically or whether it's in, my first job or later on, there was always this void where it was never enough. And I remember, even in more recent years, one of my older sisters telling me, and I just said something. Well, I just feel like it's never enough, and I feel like I'm hard to love, right? Like I'm just this difficult person that is just hard to love. And as you can imagine, of course, this has repercussions on the way you show up in business, even though when you're in the business of helping others, it's not as obvious because you really channel your energy, your passion into, making an impact, which is wonderful, right? But you make an even bigger impact when you look inward and see what's going on. And my sister was right. And what she told me at the time was like, Fadela, it's not that you're hard to love. You're just hard, loving when it comes to you. You're the one who's having a hard time loving you.
Ooh.
And it was surprising to me because I had already done years of therapy. I had already started on this journey. It wasn't like breaking news. I never picked up a personal development book and never journaled about anything, right? Like I had already done a lot of work, but I noticed that I fixed some of the more superficial layers, which were more around, setting boundaries and saying no and being assertive and all those things, which are super important, right? But inside, it was still this sense of I'm hard to love. Like I'm just a difficult person. I'm complicated and I'm difficult.
There's so much things I just want to ask. Okay, so hold on a sec. Let me just ask real quick up there. Okay, so one thing that came through right now is when we're having a lot of transformational experiences, right? We bend ourselves over and over, like you just said. We have
Yeah.
just so many different versions of ourselves, like keep on showing up. Then here is one thing that I feel the majority part of we as women that we kind of like share um, in this awkward place is navigating how to be nice and how to be kind, right? And
Yeah.
because this is because you talk about boundaries. You just talk about boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Boundaries, and then that would challenge our inner inquiry about how honest are you to be kind to people rather to
Yeah.
be nice, to be that social gentleness, yes, but then people pleasing.
Yeah.
So can you just share more about
Yeah.
this part of how we navigate?
So there's a big difference because I've always been it's funny because people from the outside, like people who knew me when I was growing up, when I was younger, will say you always had this tough carapace, almost like this outside, this armor, right? Like you were this tough cookie, right? But people who were closer to me knew that was just a shield. And this is where it's interesting because even when I think of my, university years, etc., I was very nice. Like I was such a joyful, nice. I'm still very joyful, but it's that niceness that was not driven by a genuine care for others. Of course, I cared about others, but underneath it, there was this fear of not being liked, not being accepted, not belonging. And when something is driven by fear, it can't, like in terms of authenticity, it's just, I mean, I know some people are motivated by, the moving away from things they don't want, but my personality is actually moving towards what I want. Like show me the shiny thing that I need to work hard for and I'm here for it. Right. But niceness is, in my experience, driven by a fear of rejection, a fear of not being liked, a fear of disrupting some of the dynamics, the harmony in relationships. So even if that means it's at your own expense, it's at your detriment, you're still going to do it because others always trump self.
Yes. So I have a question, just being curious, because you've been helping people in the executive arena.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when it's at work front, there's different work dynamics, right? Like there's a superior, the boss, and you, that type of
Yeah,
relationship.
of course.
How do you
Yeah.
stay grounded while still not being that you have to comply to a certain standard just because you have to be nice, but you can be kind?
Well, it's very different. I think
Yeah.
the point, I mean, in a corporate environment
Yeah.
anyway, like you have to be cordial and you have to have good relationships. And here's the thing. the more connected, the more emotional proximity you have with others, regardless of their position, their roles, the
Exactly.
easier it is for you to be yourself because there's this trust, right?
Right.
It's like I can show up and be myself. And of course, don't get me wrong, Jen, like we have different versions of myself. This version of myself today is not the same of the one where I'm talking to my older sister or when I'm
Mhm.
with my kid, but that doesn't mean it's not authentic. The way I like to look at it is a little bit like you have different clothes for different seasons. They all belong to you. You're not stealing them from anyone, but you know how to dress appropriately. And it's a little bit the same when we show up in social environments. So, of course, there is a certain level of adaptation, but you don't want to chameleon yourself so much that at the end of it, at the end of like, I don't know, 10 years working for a company, you're like, who am I? What was my initial color? I don't even know anymore. Right? We
Mhm.
don't want to get to that point.
I love this so much because your analogy of, the clothes in the closet that you're choosing, they're all yours, but you get
Yeah.
to choose with discernment, right?
Hmm.
And it gives a lot of room. It gives permission for us to kind of like also play around with what kind of
Yeah.
personality, because we keep on shedding our skin anyway. What feels more authentic in connection with our colleague, with our team
Yeah.
members, right? That's
Yeah,
amazing.
with our friends even because
Our
we're
friends
evolving, we're
too.
constantly evolving. Yeah. So it's about
Yeah.
being self-aware enough, and this is one of the areas where people tend to overestimate their self-awareness. I mean,
Mm.
there are lots of studies on the topic. Tasha Eurich has an amazing TED talk on self-awareness. But it is true that I would say that especially for us women entrepreneurs, like, high achievers in general, and just professional women, we're very good at saying, okay, well, what I need to work on is this and that, right? And it's usually quite, it's not a generous interpretation. Like we can be quite blunt, like,
Mm.
my public speaking is terrible, or like I really need to work on this. So that is quite easy for
Mm.
us. The
Mm.
parts that's more difficult is to understand how our intentions sometimes don't match our impact on others. And you're like, yeah, but I really prepared for this and I did this and I did that and it just didn't land. And we're like, what's wrong? So we look for outside circumstances when actually this is where the self-awareness is a little bit lower or sometimes a lot lower. Where it's
Yeah.
just like, hang on. If I don't know how it's landing, if I'm not flexible enough, then I'm not doing what I think I'm doing.
You are speaking to my heart because I've experienced those type of stages. Like, oh my God,
Yeah.
what I was trying to do, trying to achieve was not my initial intention. That was like not mismatched. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's right.
That didn't feel, it just feel kind of like yucky in a way. And then I
Yeah.
have to realign myself to what feels more true to me. Right. So
Yeah.
again, authenticity is not like, okay, straightforward, you know, next day you're
No.
just gonna transform into a whole new person and completely authentic,
No.
whatever that means to you.
No, and I think you have to be quite humble
Mm.
and compassionate with yourself as well. Because the other downfall of having this sort of introspective inclination is to constantly be analyzing, okay, fine-tuning, trying to improve. But if you've been doing it for many years, after a while, you can feel like it's a little bit of like you're overdosing. And it's just like, when does it get better? Right. So it's really about how you approach it so that you can make it something that's just normal. It's like, okay, I'm going there. I'm noticing that I'm veering to, 3 degrees off, right? That's not a big deal in the short term. But if I keep going 3 degrees off, I'm going to get somewhere completely different.
Mm.
So it's just having that kind of, okay, it looks like I'm veering a little bit. Yeah, that happens. That's the nature of being a human, right? It's like, fair enough. It's important. I'm going to address it, but without over analyzing it. And I think this is where this is something I'm guilty of, right? Like and then I'll start drowning in feelings of guilt. And then the recovering people pleaser will worry about the impact on relationships. And I didn't show up as a good friend, or I didn't show up as a good, coworker, and it just escalates. And it's this spiral that can be very detrimental to our sense of self, our self-esteem, and ultimately that's going to impact your perception of authenticity that you have, right?
I'm just feeling the snowball effect, like just running down on me right here. So, uh, Yeah, 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 it's very visceral right now. But anyhow,
Yeah,
it's I want to talk about vulnerability with you then, because for you,
yeah,
as you just mentioned, when you were little, it's easy for you to just like, I know that's what I want, da, 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 not till like later on you started feeling like, oh, I had to fit into certain boxes, and then kind of
yeah,
diminish my light a little bit.
yeah,
So in terms of vulnerability, because what I found interesting is that for high performers, overachievers, or women who are just trying very hard in life in general, right, towards their goals or
yeah,
towards family sectors, anything,
yeah,
we're so used to kind of like suppress our emotions, not expressing it, not to even talk about allowing ourselves to connect with vulnerability, right? But without going through that vulnerable connection with ourselves, then we start losing that true
yeah,
sense of what it feels like empowerment because there's no honesty.
yeah.
You see what I mean?
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, for me, vulnerability was a very hard thing. I mean, to this day, my mother still asks me, why do you have to tell so much about your business, right? Like your stuff, like your personal life. She's still shocked that I shared, my journey with disordered eating, with emotional eating, like some of my struggles. Like she is still appalled. I know she still is. And I've been doing this for a long time now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So the way I was raised was very much about keep it together, show no weakness because they will use that against you. And I'll go one step further and I will say, do not trust other women. They are envious, they'll be jealous, they will seize any opportunity they have to backstab you. So this is the setup. Like even growing up, like, and I'm not saying just from my family, this is what you heard around. It's just like, careful, they will betray you. Watch, it's coming,
Whew,
right?
holy.
So, and funnily enough, I've always had some very close female friendships, but it was always kind of like undermined by this narrative in the background that was just like, watch till it happens. It's coming. That train is never late, right? And, that is just something I struggle with a lot. And, even to this day, when I'm talking to, people from my family back home, I'm originally from Morocco. It hasn't changed. That has not changed, right? So this being said, going back to the topic of vulnerability. So for me, it was every time because I didn't have this practice of talking about my feelings or, hey, I'm feeling inadequate, or I felt like a lot of shame in that situation. I had no one to say that to. There wasn't a friendly space, right? So of course I had some friends I could share it with. But oftentimes, what I would find is that even with people very close to me, I would share something and almost immediately regret it. It was a little bit like a hangover. You're just like, what did I do? What did I say? And obviously, no alcohol involved. It was just that bad. It felt like that. Just like, what did I do the other night? I shared all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Panic. They will never look at me the same way. They will always judge. They will tell other people about it. So there was all that stuff, right? Because there was this assumption underneath it all that there was something shameful about those vulnerabilities. Versus now I'm talking about it. So, okay, I've already said it. You can go gossip about it. Good for you. But that's never happened because it's all in the open. Like there's not. And the other thing to understand and looking at the like business world as well is that vulnerability does not mean going dear diary on everybody and spilling everything, every secret. That's not what it is. Vulnerability is just giving the opportunity to people you choose, whether it's people in your team, your friends, your family, your community, if you have like a bigger community, to get a sense of who you are, but as a multifaceted person, not as this best version of you, this, social media highlights, so to speak, or like real life social highlights. It's just that they get a sense of like, yeah, no, like, I mean, I don't know her super well, but I feel like I know her. I get her, like what kind of person she is or what kind of person he is. And I think that's the importance of vulnerability because that's what breeds trust. Without that, I mean, would you trust a complete stranger with, I don't know, your house keys? You wouldn't. But if you travel and you have plans to water or whatever,
Mhm.
you need to feel like you know the person well enough to be like, hey, we haven't traveled together, but I feel like I can trust her. Jen, here you go. Could you please do that for me? So, and it's the same in a team, right? If I feel like my leader cares about me, and again, it's not about vertical or, just thinking on a human level. Do you care personally about me as a person? That doesn't mean I tell you about everything that happens in my private life, but I can tell there's a genuine care. I'm more likely to go, an extra mile for you. I'm
Mm.
more likely to stick around, even if there are no, perks, so to speak, just because I know you care about me and I care back. So I want to help you. So this does not happen without vulnerability. That cannot happen.
I can't be more grateful for you to just even mention everything about this, because it has so much to do with the narratives that we kept in our mind, right? And all those
Yeah.
labelings of societies of, oh yeah, this person, yeah, this person works at this place and the title is this. So immediately how you associate with that individual is the given titles and the given labels, right?
Yeah.
Before you're willing to even make that genuine connection. And that's why I feel there's a lot of the so-called political issues that I personally had experience too. Well, I
Yeah.
look back and it's like, yeah, I was so
Yeah.
attached to those so-called narratives, the labels that I thought, yeah, the boss, the superior, the team
Yeah.
member
The status.
should
Yeah.
status. That's how we should interact with the status accordingly. And that leaves
Yeah.
genuine connection, and not to even talk about authenticity here.
Yeah.
So what you just mentioned is it's so simple, but yet it is like
It makes a huge difference.
it
It
makes
makes
a
a
huge
huge difference. Yeah. And then, some people imagine someone who's in an important leadership position, someone with a big team, right? And you can put yourself in their shoes for a second and be like, but if I show vulnerability, that's going to make them lose their trust in my ability to lead. They're going to think he doesn't have it together. But this is the equivalent of saying, you and I are on the plane, long distance. And then the pilot says, okay, there's going to be a lot of turbulence right now. It's going to be very rocky, very shaky. Uh, Please buckle up. We're going to make it through. But I just want you to know it's going to be rocky and some of you might be a little scared, but I just want you to know I know exactly what I'm doing and I will get you to your final destination. The versus going through the turbulence, it's all right, folks, we're all doing well. Don't you worry. There's nothing wrong. It's not the same. Like, that wouldn't inspire me trust, or someone who would go too far in the vulnerability and share every insecurity. Like, I'm freaking out, guys. There's turbulence. Like, that wouldn't be reassuring to us. But knowing that, hey, this is hard, we're going through an internal reshuffling, whatever, a recession, whatever it is, but I've got this. It's hard, but I've got this. I've got you and I've got us.
You just pointed out something so good, which is the fine line in between overly like being that, I can't even find a word, mushy gushy, like, okay, be vulnerable, but yet so ungrounded.
It's sturdy. You want to be sturdy.
Right, be sturdy, right? So in order to get to this precision, we need to really connect with that vulnerability within ourselves, so we are able
Yeah.
to hold space for others. So again,
Yeah.
vulnerability is not just how are we going to show up vulnerably publicly to others, but how can we hold that vulnerable space for ourselves?
Yeah. I think so. And I think to give yourself permission
Mm.
to accept that part of you, because it's an important part of you, like those vulnerabilities. And obviously your vulnerabilities in your 20s are not the same as they will be, later on in life, but that's okay, right? But it's just being open, and just, this is where the compassion, I mean, hopefully the next generations won't have that, but we shouldn't even need compassion. Like, that's normal. It's normal to have these vulnerabilities, just like it's normal to get hungry. So my hope is that the future generations will treat it like that. It's just normal, right? But for us, there is this work of like, this whole giving ourselves permission to be imperfect. And it's like, it's, when you think about it, it's just like, really? Like, we actually need to do that? Like, it's not obvious? No, it's not. It's not.
Mm.
We have to do this, legwork, this behind the scenes work to make it okay and normal.
Okay, so I'm kind of wanting to circle back to, what we talked about. So again, like high achievers, the women that you served or I served, they tend to,
Yeah.
even my past self, we tend to have a lot of
Yeah.
overwhelming feelings, and we feel like, oh yeah, we have to wear a mask, for
A mask, 100%, a mask.
safety,
Yeah.
right? For safety issues too. So a lot of times, when we're not dealing face to face to our own overwhelming big feelings, we tend to get passive aggressive or aggressive outwardly sometimes, right? And then,
Yeah.
so,
Or self-destructive.
or self-destructive. I'm sure your book has.
Yeah. It's like an implosion. It's an implosion. You would see nothing on the outside, but that's also one of the less spoken of, which is you just take it out on you
Yeah.
as
Okay.
well.
So okay. So I want to talk about self-esteem, because self-esteem and self-worth is
Yeah.
two different things from my point of view, right?
Hmm.
Self
Yeah.
as in to be like your perceived confidence, like your capacity, capability, that you're able to do certain things or achieve certain things in a way.
Mm.
Well, of course, I want to hear what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But self-worth is something about, it's not related to or correlated directly to your so-called what you have done, what you have achieved, what you have
It's your intrinsic value. Right.
intrinsic value, your innate worth in
Yeah.
this on this planet.
Yeah.
So when we are talking about self-empowerment, now inviting self-empowerment in, how do we connect this vulnerability element to help us to
Mm.
feel more naturally empowered, rather than say, oh, I have to
Yeah.
feel like safe enough, so I have to put a mask, right, in order to
Yeah.
get by the world.
Yeah. And this is an interesting one because this whole idea of mass, oftentimes it's linked to people, individuals, but women. It's very common in women of having their sense of self inherently linked to what they do, their performance. And that is a recipe for disaster because when things are going well, yippee, all good. However, if you think about it, that makes you at the mercy, that puts you at the mercy of external circumstances, of external variables that you have absolutely no control over, right? So you were talking earlier about, self-esteem, self-worth. I would go further and say there's confidence and then there's self-esteem and self-worth, because confidence is very much linked to your ability to do things, to get things done, to accomplish goals, etc. And it's normal when it comes to confidence to have it linked to your competence. If you've been a hairdresser or you've been a pilot, after 10 years of being a pilot, to go back to our pilot analogy, of course, there's a sense of confidence that comes from just being competent and doing it with ease, right? You're like, this is what I do. And that's healthy. That's normal, right? Like, I'll give you an example. My mom is very, very confident when it comes to her area of expertise, which is women's health, etc. You put her in social settings, she gets much more shy. Like, you wouldn't necessarily say that she's the same confident person. So that can be selective. Some people are very confident in business. You put them in a dating situation, completely different, right? So that's the confidence. Now, the self-worth, if we were to be very, very simplistic, right? Like if we really simplify it, is the opinion you have of yourself. What do you think about
Mm.
you? You, right? And that is a tricky question. And if you ask me if I'm being candid, it depends. It depends on what's going on. And I'm working on having it more stable, or just like, yeah, like I'm not doing so well in this and that, but overall, I think I'm a decent person. I like me, right? I would love to say that this is the case 100% of the time. It's not. I would be lying to you. I still have to work on it and kind of coach myself through the different, because it's hardwired. That's how we grew up. And it's the wiring that we've had the longest. So think about it this way. Let's just imagine, I know you've been on this journey for longer, but let's just imagine you've been on this journey for the past 5 years, just as an example. Yeah. And you're 40 years old, right? That means that, it's only been 5 years out of 40, right? So the default setting are really, really hardwired. And you might feel like you're making these great progressions, etc. And you're like, this is the new me. Like, I love me. I love what I do. And I'm being balanced, blah, blah, blah. But the moment a crisis happens, we tend to revert because that is what we've practiced the most. So that is what requires the least energy to respond or react to a situation that feels overwhelming or that feels hard. That's why. It's
That
not because it hasn't worked or there's something wrong with you or anything like that. It's just an energy efficiency. What have you used the most? Right? It's like if you were learning like CPR or like, first aid, and they just introduced this new technique. Well, in case of emergency, you're going to go to the one that you've practiced for 10 years because that's just safer. That's more sure, right?
you explained it all, dear. You just explained so well because we practice what we have done the longest, right? And then that's what we're the most safe. We're the safest. We're the most confident.
Yeah.
And then so when we talk about compassion, right? And that's why we still need to remind ourselves, be compassionate and gentle with ourselves, because a lot of times you thought, you have gone through a lot of, transformational success, but apparently when something hits you, bang, you went back to the same old cycle.
Yeah.
So I really hope one day, or the next
and just on a hopeful note on that, right?
Yes.
Like we're not stuck, like we're not helpless in this cycle. The thing that's important to mention is that even if you might revert or feel like you're regressing, you're not going to hang out there for too long. So don't worry. Like that's the thing that I want to tell people. Otherwise, it's like, well, why am I doing all this work, right? If I'm just going to go back to my old ways, like let me spare myself like the energy.
Definitely. No, thank you.
But that's the thing. You won't stay there.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
Super important. And it's also because without saying that would be like, why are we doing damn work, right?
Exactly. It's like, for what?
Yeah, so basically it's going to, that repetition of the recycling part will get shorter, or it feels easier. I'll just put it there.
Exactly. 100%. That's exactly it. And that's part of that's part of the drill, right? Like that's okay. It's part of the deal. And I love that I get to practice. It's a little bit like, if I was practicing a new sport, it's getting to the next level. Oh, this time it took me 2 days to get out of this funk. This time it only took me 2 hours of overthinking before I caught myself and interrupted that pattern. And I'm like, that I celebrate. I'm like, I could have spent days on that before. So this is nice. 2 hours is good. Right?
I love your spirit. It's about celebrating for my awareness, right? Even though I haven't got to the goal of, I quit overthinking forever.
No. That would be very inattentive if that's what I was telling you today.
But the spirit of, we're all human here. It's good that, when we're feeling good, we're like, today's rainbows and unicorns, but not the next day. Sometimes it could be flip opposite. Right? So allowing ourselves to say, we're doing our best, and that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough.
And to go back to your question earlier about vulnerability and women who are in positions of power, who are heading businesses or organizations, etc. Why vulnerability is also important is because it signals to other people that it's also okay for them to be human, and that has various implications, right? So on the one hand, and I talk about this like almost every week with clients. You can be very smart, very bright, very performant, right? And your team might respect you and look up to you. But then there are two different routes. If you are someone who shows your human side, which is vulnerability, then there's an element of feeling inspired. It's like, oh yeah, like I know where he started or where she started. And like, I know the kind of things that they've had to work on to get to this level. And that feels inspiring, right? Or it's just like, this person is just, no cracks. It's this perfect, facade out there. And I can say, wow, I admire that. But does it inspire me? No. Could it intimidate me? Possibly, right? So if I'm in a meeting with that kind of woman who just seems like so sharp, so fast, so quick, right? And I'm like, who am I with my little idea? I'm probably going to make a fool of myself. Why should I even say something? Can I say something? I don't know, right? So this is something else to think about. Like, what do you signal to people?
Wow, this is powerful. So how would you, this is going to be a wrap-up question. I love this conversation, by the way, but I'm going to keep it, short and sweet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like what you just previously said, for the person who has no crack, or at least try their hardest to have no
perceive.
Crack,
Yeah.
Perceive as no crack. how would you suggest them to let their crack to be more naturally shown without like feeling too way too vulnerable for them because they're not used to
Okay.
vulnerability.
No. So the thing that I recommend usually that feels like a low-hanging fruit, it's like, let's just imagine you navigated this crisis or this challenge brilliantly. You did it and everyone is clapping. It's wonderful. So if you have people closer to you, whether even your family, right? Like sometimes that can happen with your closest family, right? So whether it's your family or your team, is to say, yeah, it turned out really well. But actually, the whole time I was just thinking, are these people going to lose their job? Am I going to be responsible for, all these families not having an income? And that was terrifying. Like I cannot tell you the number of nights I just couldn't fall asleep. So this is like, it's already a happy ending. We know it worked out. So this is why I'm saying it's a low hanging fruit. So
Mm,
even if you're like backpedaling and saying, yeah, we're all happy, I'm getting all the praise. But by the way, like that was, I was really worried about that.
yeah. Okay. Beautiful. So that means that you invite yourself to share, but then it's the after the process, probably.
Yeah, that feels safer because you already know it works out. So for someone who's never been vulnerable, this is like the 101. It's the easiest way to do it because you already know that there was a happy ending, right? So you can share, yeah, it's a happy ending, but I still had my self doubt and I was worried about this. So just so you know.
Awesome.
And
Okay.
it's a teaching moment.
It is a teaching moment. It is a teaching moment. Yeah. So, what would you suggest? One thing to anyone who's watching here, women who
Yeah,
that they really want to explore being vulnerable at the same time still maintain their strength,
absolutely.
self empowerment, right? So, how what's the easiest way for them to kind of like tap in or navigate? Just a
Yeah.
general suggestion here.
I mean, I would say is picking things that don't involve too much of a personal risk so that it doesn't feel like a threat because vulnerability can feel like a threat, right? So pick something that doesn't feel charged, too charged, right? So whether it's with your friend, something that you would never do, or like, let's just say, let me give you a personal example. This is what I did and I'm in the business, right? Like this is what I do for a living. And one day I told one of my colleagues, I said, this had to be probably in the 10 years of coaching, my worst coaching session. I feel like I just want to curl up in a ball and cry. Like I felt so bad. I've never had a coaching session like that ever in over 10 years. And, obviously she was supportive. And then she said, Fadela, I just never thought I would ever hear something like that from you. I was like, really? Why? She's like, but you just look so perfect in your coaching and everyone loves you and you get all this positive feedback. And like, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So this is just an example.
I love it because yes, for my initial perception of you, I'll just openly share this too. You are that capable, empowering person in my eyes, and that's also why I really wanted to have you here to share your life.
Thank you.
You know, and at the same time, the reason why I want you to also share that vulnerable element that can play in this conversation is also to see this beautiful balance of your strength within, but at the same time you can be that feminine. It's feminine in a way.
It is. It's 100%.
The feminine part of I'm able to show the part of me that is wide open to the world. It can be judged sometimes, but then I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
There's that
It's the
strength there.
softness.
Yeah, there's that
Yeah.
strength in there, soft strength in there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this because it's hard to even use words like dictionary words, right? All
I
this
know. I
vulnerability,
know, right?
but we can feel the energy of how this person's presence exuding it, and
Yeah.
how true this person is. I'm having goosebumps
Yeah.
right now. But yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you, my beautiful sister.
Thank you.
You are
Thank you so much.
you are such light in this world, and thank you for always encouraging me too. Because authenticity is a work, work of
Yeah, it is.
work of art.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
yeah. Thank
And
you.
for this beautiful topic, which is helping me practice even more my vulnerability on a different level.
Yeah, okay, high five on this. And so for
Exactly.
everyone who is open and want to know even more about Fadela's work, check out Fadela's website. Okay, you want to share some of more info that for people to follow you here, sister?
Sure, it's Fadela Hilali. So even on social, if you go on Instagram, it's Fadela Hilali altogether. And my website is the same, fadelahilali.com.
Awesome. All right. Thank you
Thank you.
guys. Thank you, beautiful sister. Then we'll catch up soon.
Bye.
Love you. Bye,
Love
guys.
you too. Bye, my love. Bye.